Usually when companies talk about strategy, they talk about warfare. They talk about armies fighting each other and defeating each other. And that's not what we're going to talk about. We're talking about strategy here, and we have to talk about strategy because it's incredibly important to employer brand. Let's start with some basics. If you're the talent acquisition manager, or if you know the talent acquisition owner, ask them, how do they make decisions in terms of how they leverage their resources? They have a certain amount of headcount. How do they decide how many people should be sourcers, how many people should be coordinators, and how many people should be recruiters? They have a certain budget. How do they decide how much money goes into tools and platforms? How much goes into ads? And that doesn't even ask the question of how much they should expect to spend on agencies. They have finite resources. The choices they make and how they apply those resources is a strategic one. Making choices to maximize outcomes using available resources in the context that you may or may not control. Now, when we're talking about employer brand strategy, we're asking the question, how do we take those resources that already exist and make better outcomes? It sounds simple, but it's actually very complex. Think about what you bring as the employer brander to the table. If your company is focused on let's call it a brute force approach to recruiting, in which recruiters or sourcers go out and they bug as many people as they possibly can, would you like to learn more about this job? Maybe it's inbound focused, maybe it's outbound focused and outreach focused or job board focused, but ultimately their job is to get in front of as many people as possible so they can ask them, would you like to learn more about this job? Like I said, it's a brute force approach. Now it takes a certain amount of resource to make that work. Right? You need tools to allow them to send messages and text messages and emails and in-mails and all those sorts of things. That's a resource demand. What if you took some of those resources and said you won't be able to reach as many people en masse, but you're going to build a series of videos that makes your company look more compelling to a certain audience? Suddenly, instead of having to reach out to 100 or 200 people to get one, yeah, I'd be interested, now they only have to reach out to 10 because the content they're putting out there is more interesting, more engaging, it's more focused to a certain audience, it's more focused around who you actually care to hire, not just anybody who will respond. These are strategic conversations because you get to enter that conversation and say, yes, you've done it a certain way for a very long time, but employer brand allows you to make different decisions, to shift your resources, to build content, to build stories, to generate demand and desire for your company so that they can make different optimal decisions on those resources. We can take this strategic approach to the next level. Who do you actually want to talk to? Who do you actually want to hire? If you're hiring nurses, you don't just want any old nurse. There's a certain type of nurse who's going to fit really well with the culture, who's really going to vibe with your overall approach, who likes the way you do things, who likes what you reward. You want to hire that person. That is your perfect example of a nurse that you would love to hire. But if you're taking a brute force approach, you don't know if the person you're reaching out to is exactly the right fit or someone who isn't the right fit, but still meets the criteria. Understanding who you're trying to reach, understanding what you offer, that's also strategic. That is also what you can do, is help build content and stories that attract exactly that kind of person. Now, as you look at talent acquisition, there's a couple of, teams at play. First, there are recruiters. Like I said, they very often are asked to take a brute force approach, talk to as many people as you can. It works to some extent. You can make it better. Also, you've got TA leadership, and they're taking a more defensive approach because it seems like most of their job is defending recruiters and the rest of their team from leadership who asks, why are we spending so much money on recruiting? Why aren't we getting the objectives we wanted? It's a very defensive play. And if you bring in marketing, which some companies do, their job is to say, oh, okay, yeah, we know how to make more applicants, let's go. Hold on. We already have applicants. It's not a complete lack of applicants. What our problem is a lack of quality applicants, of good hires. So if you bring marketing in to do more of the same, you're going to attract more of the same. I'm not sure what the value of attracting more candidates in applications you don't actually want to hire is. So here in the middle of those three teams, that's where employer brand lives. To take marketing thinking, but do that whole quality versus quantity refactoring. Help recruiters tell better stories so they don't have to be as brute force approach. Show real outcomes so leadership doesn't have to justify their time and resources so often. Employer brand gets to drive the employer brand strategy, and that's no small thing. Now, all the laws of employer branding tend to have challenges or obstacles or downsides to their power, and strategy is no exception. Now, in strategy's case, the problem is most companies don't see employer brand as particularly strategic. Whether it's because they lump it in with talent acquisition, who they also see as deeply unstrategic, or the person who's driving it, it's their first time as an employer brander, or they're not given a title that denotes strategic thinking. They're an employer brand specialist, or they're an employer brand manager. They don't often give employer branders the chance to sit at the strategic table, and that limits employer branders' ability to do great work. That's why, as a law of employer brand, strategy is so important. You have to focus on it. You have to think about it. You have to consider how can you make your work not just more strategic, but more obviously strategic. How do you communicate it in strategic terms so that the organization starts to realize, oh, this person's got something going on here. Let's talk more. Let's have better conversations. Maybe this is the lever or the gateway to making talent acquisition a bit more strategic. Now, by way of example, let's look to the turn of the century. And it freaks me out to say the turn of the century as a thing I just lived through, but here we are. 1999, SAS was a tiny little data analysis company in Cary, North Carolina. Cary being a suburb of Raleigh, North Carolina, in the Research Triangle Park. They were not a big company, but SAS knew if they wanted to hire the kind of talent they needed to be different, they needed to be strategic, and they needed to offer something that other companies wouldn't. What they offered was to take care of their staff better than anybody else. And when I say take care of, by modern standards, it's impressive. By 1999 standards, it was put them on a cover of a magazine level amazing. It was on-site childcare, on-site healthcare, on-site gym, and the gym had an on-site laundry so that you put your name in the back of your gym shorts and someone would wash them and stick them in your locker. Talking on-site food and that was free, snacks. It was amazing. 1999, this was mind-blowing. And what it led to was more great talent saying, I want that. It was something different to be interested in. Now, by doing so, it actually allowed them to lower salaries. They didn't have to pay a premium for great talent because the perks were so attractive, great people were applying. Great people were volunteering and saying, I want to be a part of this. Strategically, they looked at all of their resources and said, how do we align them to attract the best quality talent? And that was their strategic choice. Like I said, they didn't offer high-end salaries. They didn't need to. They were offering something different. And while every other company ended up having to compete on the basis of how much money can we give you, SAS could do something different. And they could attract a very different, very highly qualified kind of talent. So, first law of employer brand is strategy. You need to embrace it, think about it, always keep it in your thoughts. That's how you're going to do your best work. For more about the laws of employer branding, subscribe to this YouTube channel or subscribe to employerbrandheadlines.com. It's my free newsletter, and that's where I write this material first. I'll be doing it all summer long.